They say the moments that rewrite your entire life rarely I with than the or sirens. Most of them sleeping barefoot on an ordinary Thursday when the dishwasher is humming and the street lights outside look tired. That was the kind of night it was nothing special. Nothing marked than a nickel and just another evening in a house that had forgotten how to feel like home. My name though isn't Mete. But for the sake of the story, you can call me Elena. 36. Married 7 years, stepmother for Phoebe. The house is a handsome colonial on a cul-de-sac where Elon is manicured and the smile is practiced. Inside, it smells of the candles and the lemon polish she used when I am trying to outrun my own thoughts. My husband, Victor, is the kind of man who matches loving frequent flyer miles and quarterly bonuses. He kisses my forehead on his way to the airport, promises to text when he lands, and somehow never notices that he stopped waiting up a long time ago. Then there is a Julian. 17 going in 100. Victor is a son from his first marriage. Tall, yet always moving like he's afraid of taking up too much space. He draws constantly charcoal on his fingers, smooth hairs on his lips. Sketches the things that Estabas walk past without seeing. So we rainbits on a window pane, se except kebab saro in a strange mouth at the grocery store. Around his father he folds himself small and says in single syllables, disappears into headphones and closed doors. Around me he used to soften, just a fraction. Edelinge, while each up tangents, is what song was playing, leave a no pencil and accounted like a nothing. Tiny, harmless moments he collected the way other people collect. Seashells he told myself he was. Simply glad someone in the house still noticed. He was alive, so night everything. Till it started with a some storm that knocked the power out just after 9. Victor was in Denver, or maybe Seattle, somewhere with a hotel suite and a view wouldn't remember. The sudden darkness felt almost ceremonial, like the universe dimming the lights so no one else could watch what was coming. He moved through the house with a single candle, checking windows, telling myself he was being responsible. The flame painted long gold fingers across the walls. When he reached the hallway upstairs, he saw it, a thin blade of cold blue light, lighting beneath Julian's door. Not candlelight, screen light. He should have kept walking. Instead he stood there, listening to the rain geme the roof, and my own pulse geme harder. In act 11, soft as a secret. No ense. Just a loathsome paves I could feel in my sternum. My palm found a doorknob before my brain caught up. The door side open, he was on the floor, back against the bed, knees drawn up, headphones around his neck like a collar. The glow from his tablet turned his face into something half real, half dream. Whatever he was watching had carved wetness into the corners of his eyes. His lips were parted, breathed shallow, one hand pressed flat over his heart as if he were trying to keep it from leaping out of his chest. He looked unbearably young and impassably enchanted at the same time. He saw me and didn't move, didn't hide the screen. They didn't speak. He simply looked up and let me see everything he judged while he looked away. Loneliness so completed had weight, loneliness yet learned how to name. In the unguarded second, something was passed between us, an electric recognition that we were both starving for the same invisible thing. I don't know how long we stayed like that. 10 seconds. 1,000 years. Long enough for the candle in my hand to bend low and drip wax onto my thumb without me feeling the pain. Eventually I backed out, pulled the door almost closed, and walked to my bedroom on legs that didn't feel like mine. I lay down fully dressed and watched the dark ceiling until the power came back and the room filled with ordinary electric light that suddenly felt obscene. Next morning I bent the toast and oversalted the eggs and pretended my hands weren't trembling. Julian never came down for breakfast. When I passed him later in the hallway, he kept his eyes on the floor, shoulders kept inward like wings folded tight. The absence of his gaze had more than any accusation could have. Victor came home 2 days later, smelling our airport coffee and someone else's cologne. He dropped his suitcase, kissed the air beside my cheek, asked if anything interesting had happened while he was gone. I said no. The light tasted metallic. After that, the house rearranged itself around a new gravity. Julian and I became two planets caught in an orbit neither of us had chosen, but neither of us knew how to escape. We never spoke about that night, yet everything we didn't say grew louder. I started leaving his bedroom door open a few inches when he drew late at night. I started walking past slower than strictly necessary. Sometimes, I'd catch a scratch up pencil and paper and imagine he was drawing the shape my silence made. One afternoon Victor was at the golf club and I now found Julian's sketchbook on the window seat in the sunroom, open like it had been waiting for me. The page showed me standing at the kitchen sink, sunlight tangled in my hair, mouth kept in a smile I didn't remember giving anyone. I had caught the exact moment when loneliness looks almost like peace. Beneath the drawing, in his careful black letters, he'd written a single line, "She still knows how to glow." I stood there so long the sun shifted and the light moved off my shoulders. When he closed the book, my fingers left them prints and the cave. That night he couldn't sleep. Say was thick, the kind of August heat that makes sheets feel like a punishment. Around 2 in the morning, he had music low, slow, something with a heartbeat bass line drifting down the hallway. Julian Esedor stood up and wide the new shell, a wedge of blood spilling across the carpet like an invitation at the end. I told myself he was only going to close it. Instead he stepped inside. I was sitting on the edge of his bed in nothing but drawstring pants, headphones dangling, skin lit warm by the small lamp on his desk. Sorum smelled up graphite and the storm, the taunted white-eyed yet. When he looked up, there was no surprise in his eyes, only a question. He was terrified to ask out loud. He stepped a foot away, close enough to see the faint skate of freckles across his collarbone, close enough to feel it radiating off him like sunlight of pavement. WIDN touch. We barely breathed, but something invisible reached out and wrapped itself around both of us until the space between heartbeats disappeared. I don't know who moved fast. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe the distance simply collapsed under its own weight. One moment we were to separate it takes. The next we were sharing the same air, the same tremor, the same terrifying relief. His hand rose slowly, have it beside my cheek without making contact, asking permission the only way he knew how. He answered by leaning in the smallest possible inch. The tips of his fingers brushed my skin feather light, radiant, and the sound he made was half sob, half prayer. We stayed like that, suspended, foreheads almost touching, breathing each other in. No kissing, no frantic grasping, just the slow, devastating intimacy of finally being seen by someone who had also been invisible for too long. When he finally stepped back, Sorum felt cold, like winter had slipped in through the cracked window. He watched me go without trying to stop me. At the doorway, he paused and whispered the only words he could find. Thank you. For what? He wasn't sure. For the drawing. For the almost. For proving he wasn't already a ghost. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in restraint. We perfected the art of brushing past each other in doorways, of letting fingertips graze when passing the orange juice, of exchanging glances across the dinner table that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Every moment carried the memory of that night and the promise that we could survive without ever speaking of it again. Victor noticed nothing. Or perhaps he noticed and simply didn't care. Either way, the marriage continued its slow, polite disintegration. Then came the evening, everything finally shuttered open. Victor was in Toronto for 4 days. The house settled into the petit yellow hush, the times when the peasant who owns the silence is gone. On the third night, I found Julian in the kitchen at midnight, barefoot, eating cereal straight from the box. Moonlight poured through the window and painted silver along the sharp line of his shoulder blade. He meant to say goodnight and keep walking. Instead he asked, do you ever think that quiet in this house is louder than screaming? I set the cereal box down slowly. Every day, I said. His voice cracked on the second word. The waiting age voice. Voices still do. When emotions sneaks upon them, we looked at each other across the width of the island, and something inside me unclenched for the first time in years, around at the corner until I stood in front of me. I am not a kid, I said quietly. Not when it comes to this. Whatever this is, he answered. And he did. I had nothing to do with the way loneliness recognizes its own. I lifted his hand again, breathed his time, and let his knuckles trace the line of my jaw. When he didn't pull away, he let out a breath that sounded like sand. I closed my eyes, so well narrowed to the warmth of his fingertips and the thought at my own heart. Then he stepped back. Not like this, he said. My voice shook, but it didn't break. Not while everything is lies and hiding. If we ever swallow hard. If there ever is a news, it has to be in daylight. With truth, with choices that don't leave either of us bleeding in the dark. I searched my face for a long moment, then nada dulce, sharp and painful, like ripping off a bandage. The next morning he booked a therapist. That afternoon I sat Victor down and told him the marriage had been dying for years and he was no longer willing to administer CPR to a corpse. I argued, negotiated, threatened to cut me off financially, then actually cried when I realized he wasn't bluffing. By the end of the month, I had moved into a small apartment above a bookstore downtown. The kind of place where the radiators clank and the windows stick. But every room is filled with second-hand sunlight and the smell of old pages. Julian and I didn't speak for almost a year. I needed the distance to untangle what was real from what was the speech and wearing his face. I needed time to finish growing up without the weight of my wreckage on his shoulders. Then one October afternoon, he showed up at the bookstore cafe where he worked weekends. I was sitting in a taller carrying a portfolio instead of a backpack. I ordered a black coffee, sat at the corner table, and waited until my shift ended. When he walked over, he slid a sketch across the table. It was me again, the old, clear mouth no longer practicing a smile. Beneath it he had written, she learned how to grow on her own. I looked up and found him watching me the way he had that very first night open. Unafraid, Skin Nothing, y am leaving for art school in January. Asset, Paris. For 2 years, my heart performed en complicated maneuver, really fans arrow inequal meche, I just needed you to know, I continued. Boy steady, that what happened between us, whatever it was. Whatever it was, then it saved me. Not because we touched, but because for the first time, someone looked at me like it was already whole. I needed to carry it into the well. And I needed to give it back to you, stood, shouldered his back, and paused. If you ever want to write, or call, or just sit in the same room and not say anything, I llevé on the other side of an ocean. But I still had you. Then he walked out into the crisp bottom light without looking back. He sat there until the coffee went cold, staring at the drawing until the lines bled. When he finally folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket, I felt something inside me settle, not healed, not fixed, but finally. Mercifully quiet. Some connections aren't meant to become love stories with beginnings, medleys, and wedding cake endings. Some are simply set lights cutting through fog long enough for two drowning people to spot shore. They don't owe each other forever. They owe each other the truth and the space to swim their step the way alone. Years from now, I still have that sketch taped above my desk. Sometimes I touch the edge of the paper and remember the exact weight of a silence that once felt like screaming. I remember the boy who taught me I could leave a house full of lavender candles and still carry warmth inside my own skin, and on the nights when the quiet threatens to swallow me again. I remind myself that desire doesn't always wear warning signs. Sometimes it hides were in the face of someone, WH, or simply refuses to let you disappear. That is more than enough. That is everything.